So much. So this is what we're going to cover today. We are launching a new report at Technology Business Research, and so we're going to talk about it, the U.S. Federal Cloud Ecosystems Report. We're going to talk about what it is and what's in it. And then I'm going to turn over to my colleagues, and they're going to do some highlights from both the view or the perspective of the U.S. federally focused IT services vendors, and then the view from the three hyperscalers and Oracle, basically the cloud providers. And you'll understand why we're getting those perspectives. And you'll see here, this is who we're going to be talking with today. John Caucis leads our public sector, our U.S. federal-focused IT services practice, along with our colleague James Wicker. So they'll be on the line to tackle the highlights from there and to go through what they're seeing in the ecosystem with respect to the players, the vendors that they cover, and their relationships, their partnerships with the cloud vendors. And then Allan Krans, who leads our cloud and software practice, he's going to talk about the exact same thing, but from the other direction. How do the three hyperscalers and Oracle actually look at the federally focused IT services vendors? So that's what we're going to cover today. And let me show you now. Here's what this research is all about. So we're basically pulling together a couple of different research streams within Technology Business Research, both the IT services stream, the professional services stream, and then the federal cloud, or the federal stream, and then the cloud stream. So we're pulling all of that together. What the report itself does is it walks through what are the biggest trends that are happening when we look at those federal IT services vendors and the cloud providers, and then what are some specific examples that illuminate those trends and show where things are going to be going. And then the report then goes into detail from each of those perspectives. We highlight, and let me go to the next slide. We're going to highlight 5 of the vendors that you can see here under federal IT services: Booz Allen Hamilton, General Dynamics Technologies, Leidos, Mantech, and SAIC. Those are the 5 that we highlight because those have been the most active in the cloud space, the federal cloud space, over the last couple of years. And then we're also highlighting, as you can see on the right, from the cloud and software practice, Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, Microsoft Cloud, and Oracle Cloud. That's the way the report is right now. It's actually, as we speak with our editing team, it'll be rolling out next week. We didn't want to publish right at the beginning of a long weekend, so we'll roll it out in the middle of next week. You'll be able to get it. And it's going to be an annual report that we are going to update 6 months from now. The update will be more of a light lift, who has been active, what things have been changing in the market. As we all know who are on this call and attending this webinar, that the federal government process does not move quickly, so we don't feel the need to update it every 6 months. We're just going to show what's been happening in the broader ecosystem, what are some specific things that have been happening with respect to the federal IT services vendor and their cloud partners. So with that, and the other thing about this webinar, we're going to go through the material relatively quickly, but what we want to do is leave plenty of time for questions at the end. That's why we have all 3 of the guys on to support this. And so with that, I will hand it over to John Caucis to walk through the view from the federal IT services perspective. John?
Okay, thanks, Patrick, and good afternoon, everyone. Great to be here. Just to illustrate the market opportunity, when I make the statement that the market landscape in federal cloud is expanding and becoming increasingly lucrative, and that's not only for the federal technology contractors tracked under my umbrella, but also the commercially centric cloud vendors. But to illustrate the market opportunity, one of the vendors that we're going to be talking about in a few minutes, SAIC, they sponsored a study late last year on the federal cloud market, and in that study, one of the data points that they dropped was that the market has been expanding on average by more than $1.5 billion per year from federal fiscal year 2019 to federal fiscal year 2021. Our estimates, TBR's estimates for cloud spending in the federal IT sector show more or less the same. Based on our data, we've seen the market expanding at roughly a 25% compounded annual growth rate from federal fiscal year 2019 through federal fiscal 2022. What does that mean dollar-wise? Well, the market was estimated to be worth roughly between $6.5 and $7 billion in federal fiscal year 2019. As of the most recently completed federal fiscal year, that would be 2022. As of September 30th of last year, the our estimate for the size of the federal cloud market, or the volume of federal cloud or federal IT spending on cloud services and solutions, was roughly $12 billion. So in the current federal fiscal year, fiscal 23, our expectations are that the federal government will probably spend over $16.5 billion on cloud services and solutions. So the market is growing quickly. There's plenty of headroom for growth for anyone and everyone involved in the space. In fact, I'll also note that the federal government has in fact overshot projections for the total value of its cloud-related outlays each year since fiscal 2019. For example, in fiscal 19, some federal IT market observers were projecting that federal cloud spending would total only $9 billion by the upcoming fiscal year, fiscal 24. Based on everything that's happened, based on the numbers and the data that I've just detailed, we're now projecting that the total value of the federal cloud market, once, of course, next year's budget is finalized and enacted, will likely have total cloud spending north of double that original projection, that now almost 5-year-old projection. So we're expecting federal cloud spending in the upcoming fiscal year to perhaps be north of $18 billion, perhaps approaching $20 billion. So it is a large and fast-growing market, which illustrates why it has been attracting not only the federal IT vendors that I follow, but also many of the commercially focused IT and cloud-focused companies as well. The recent pandemic was credited to a degree with driving an increase, an acceleration in cloud spending, and that is true. That is true. But the increase was not precipitous. There was no sudden surge in cloud, because even prior to that, the federal government had been exploring the adoption of cloud technology since the Cloud First Directive of 2010. But as Patrick kind of alluded to a few minutes ago, things tend to move slow in the federal space. And even with the Cloud Smart Initiative in federal fiscal 2019, that did kind of light a larger fire under to propel the momentum of the cloud adoption forward a bit quicker. And yes, the pandemic did cause a sudden drop in the overall volume of IT spending and IT investment. There was a rebound from that. That rebound was fairly precipitous. But as it turns out, in retrospect, what we've seen is that many federal, civilian, and defense agencies had already been investing in their IT and network infrastructures for several years prior to the pandemic. That said, there was still an increase in overall cloud-related outlays because the pandemic did expose a number of weaknesses and inadequacies in federal IT infrastructures, most notably security, but even the collaboration technologies that agencies had been implementing prior to the pandemic. There were weaknesses and limitations that were exposed that could be addressed using cloud technologies. Security, you can't overestimate the strategic value and the strategic importance of security for federal CIOs. It is a C-level strategic concern in federal agencies. Agencies were also not prepared to budget for what they began to discover as the occasionally hidden costs and fees associated with building and maintaining cloud infrastructures. And now what they've been doing with the vendors, at least the vendors that I follow, is working more closely with them to map out the migration roadmap in the most cost-effective way in terms of operating a cloud infrastructure, particularly a hybrid cloud infrastructure. Agencies also faced and continue to face a shortage of cloud-trained and experienced talent to deploy and manage cloud-based systems. But all this said, the pandemic got a lot more credit than perhaps it deserved, but it still deserves some credit as driving what really has been an inevitable shift towards digital transformation, and what we've observed and what I detailed a few moments ago, essentially the bull market in cloud adoption. Federal agencies have embraced the notion that cloud technologies are reliable. They understand the potential behind the scalability of cloud technologies and how that scalability will enable them to will facilitate the future adoption, the future integration and expansion and implementation of other digital technologies, AI, analytics, et cetera. So with that, if we could move to the next slide, I will do a deeper dive on one of the vendors that we've observed as being particularly active in the federal cloud market. And SAIC, to put it simply, has identified cloud as a strategic growth market. They have been restructuring since their acquisition of Agility a few years back. They're continuing to restructure, but based on their activity in terms of solution introductions, partnership enhancements, or expansions, they're going after the federal cloud markets full throttle. Their go-to-market and sales efforts have increasingly focused on driving on-contract growth with current customers and cross-selling cloud-based modernization offerings to agencies that aren't currently on their roster of cloud-based clients. More specifically, from a go-to-market messaging standpoint, SAIC emphasizes the vendor-agnostic aspects of its cloud solutions, as well as the scalability and the security of its cloud-based digital transformation solutions. Cloud is also a key plank in what SAIC refers to as the growth and technology accelerants, or GTA, portion of its portfolio. And let me take a minute or two to put some fiscal context around what GTA means dollar-wise. In 2021, the solutions under that umbrella, under the GTA umbrella, generated roughly $2 billion in sales. What SAI wants to do, and that was about 30% of its total revenue base, what SAIC is intending to do is expand the proportion of GTA-related revenue, mostly cloud, to over 35% of its sales within the next year or two. Dollar-wise, that would represent growth from $2 to $3 billion. And we made this estimate based on their guidance as well as our own modeling and our own projections. So, just once again to illustrate how they see cloud as taking shape within their own revenue base. I mentioned solution introductions a moment ago. Within the last year, SAIC introduced a migration platform known as CloudSend. They have also, along with expanding their cloud-based offerings, they have been ramping up their activity, their partnership and alliance activity. We expect that they're going to continue to do so. And let me step back for a moment and make a quick comment. In my analysis, what SAIC is doing is more necessary. I applaud it, but it's also necessary because mostly due to the volume of activity related to their acquisition of Agility a few years ago, they haven't been able to focus as much on their portfolio and on their alliance ecosystem as they needed to in order to keep pace with their larger competitors, such as Leidos, or their similarly sized peers, such as General Dynamics. So to address some of the shortcomings in their portfolio and the shortcomings in their partnership ecosystem, they have been turning their attention to this now that Agility is fully integrated. So I'm scanning my notes here to see if there's anything else key that I should mention. I know that SAIC has also, one of the ways that they look at the federal cloud market, or one of the things that they're emphasizing when they go after new cloud engagements is, and you see this in some of the other tools that they've introduced recently around cloud assessment and planning tools, they see an active move towards multi-cloud adoption, and so the tools that they have they've launched over the last year or so have focused on helping agencies address that earlier point that I made around getting a better handle on cloud spending and the expenses related to cloud implementations. SAIC believes that it's critical to provide tools to their agency clients that improve the accuracy of budgeting and forecasting cloud outlays in the future, because that in turn will enable the downstream adoption of other digital technologies, AI, analytics, machine learning. So in a nutshell, with respect to SAIC, they are going after the market. They're one of a handful of larger players that are also tracked within our federal IT and IT services research practice. There are actually 11 other companies, 11 other leading technology vendors and systems integrators, including SAIC's near size peers such as Leidos, who I mentioned earlier, General Dynamics, and Booz Allen Hamilton. And what we're doing with our research program in federal IT is we are also putting our microscope more on each vendor's individual cloud-related activities. We started doing this earlier this year. So when you look at our reports, you're going to see here and there, depending on obviously what's available and what we're able to obtain through the course of our research, but you will see a greater focus on cloud-related activities on behalf of all of the 11 companies that we track to one degree or another. So with that, I will hand the presentation over to our cloud research lead, Allan Krans, who will discuss the federal cloud market opportunity from the perspective of the commercial cloud providers.
Great. Thanks, John. And thanks, everybody, for joining. Just a quick reminder, so we're putting the finishing touches on the first version of this coverage as we speak and into next week. But any questions that you have, not only about what John and I go through, but coverage areas that you'd like to see in the report as we evolve it and improve it, feel free to put those into the chat as we go through today's session, and happy to make it interactive. So John's context was great in terms of the level of investment in federal IT cloud initiatives. And just for additional context around that, when you look at some of the estimates around the total technology spending for U.S. federal, it gets up somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 billion. So, 10 to 20% is, we think, a reasonable estimate about what portion of that total is going to the cloud space. And I think it's important to think about the broader context of, for the IT market overall, that's behind, the proportion of investments that are going to cloud if you look at, compare with traditional IT and overall IT spending. So certainly they're behind in terms of the mix. And it gives us some things to think about in terms of not just the dollars and the partnerships and the initiatives, but for those government CIOs, the types of things that they can expect to go through, not just with technology implementations, but with broader organizational changes, skills changes, the approach to IT and how it's used within those departments. We're starting to see some hints of that, but know from looking at the commercial side with our adoption research that there will be it's going to be an evolution in terms of how IT is used and how cloud plays a role and changes that as it goes forward. So those are all things that we're looking at with the research. So to go back to kind of the graph here and the depiction of some of the opportunity for the cloud vendors, we're looking at that opportunity through two main lenses. Here's the Prime Awards for three of the three hyperscalers. We're going to include Oracle from a quantitative perspective as well. So there's the Prime participation, and then subawards, which are those contracts led by the federal systems integrators that pull in portions and allotments for the cloud technology vendors to provide their solutions as part of that. And so both are important. But the story that we're telling here, and we see a lot of change coming over the past 6 months and over the next 3 years as it plays out. But really, if you look prior to the big increase for the JWCC contract, the prime contracts were especially just for the cloud portions, and we are including the overall revenue. So for vendors like Microsoft and Oracle, there's traditional software that's part of that. There's a lot of spend on maintenance that composes a lot of those prime contracts for them. But when you start to look at just pure cloud technology, AWS really led in terms of some of those prime awards. They had direct agreements with GSA was a big one for them, where they government customers can procure directly from the GSA for AWS services. But overall, that was a small portion, relatively small streams of revenue available for cloud technologies in large part. And that's why the awarding of the JWCC late last year is a big shift. And I think it ties into that growing evolution of how cloud is being seen and used and expected to be invested in over the next 3 to 5 years, because it's just off the charts in terms of how it changes the opportunity for these cloud vendors to win government revenue and build the book of business through a direct relationship with government agencies going forward. And so there's 4 vendors that are in line to get that potential value, and we are depicting the total potential awards here. So it's not definite revenue, it's not a firm commitment, but there is that award in place for them to compete. And so far they're just rolling out those first task orders focused on things that, again, if we look at the commercial side, makes sense in terms of the evolution. So looking at setting up some sandbox environments to really dig in and actually use the cloud technologies from each of the 4 different vendors. I think they all got the same request, and we'll be able to at least have agencies go in and try the different capabilities and start to build that familiarity with the tool sets that are available. And we think that's where, from a functional perspective, you're going to start to see the vendors differentiate and stand out once folks can get in and really start to get their hands directly on those solutions, because it's been across the board, a lot of not just certifications, but building capabilities that align to some of the key things that the government users are going to want. So they're behind in terms of some of the levels of adoption, but the advantage to that is that they can look to capitalize on some of the new functionality, the things around edge and AI that weren't available in the first iterations of cloud solutions, but certainly are now. So they're going to want to dive right into the latest and greatest capabilities. And obviously, if you look at some of the requirements of mobility, connected, secure, network access, all those things, true solutions that can be used in a variety of different difficult environments, all those things are going to be part of what the vendors have invested in through their own innovation, as well as through partnerships with other technology vendors, as well as their services partners to enable some of those unique use cases for government users. So all the vendors are only guaranteed about $100,000 as part of that contract, but certainly competing for up to $9 billion in total value is a real game changer in terms of revenue streams coming from federal government for these four vendors. And then also as part of the report, we have these profiles for each of the four providers as part of the research. So it's kind of a snapshot of some of the organization investment, the business so far, as you look at government clients as well as contract awards and all those types of things. And then we're also including views that pull in from John's cover companies around the FSIs to look at the heat map of who's working more with who, how they've kind of evolved that partnership, how that aligns to the different government agencies within U.S. Fed. So we really start to get a sense of what type of solutions are being put in place, where the working relationship and value prop seems to meld better between the two sides more than others. But really overall, AWS is the leader, and that's not only from some of those prime awards that they've been able to build up over the past couple of years, but they also lead in terms of not just the revenue streams from those sub-awards and working with partners in the Fed space, but just the number of relationships that they've been able to go out and win contracts with and be a part of those solutions stands out, even compared with a vendor like Microsoft, which has been in there for quite some time with the traditional software. AWS has done a great job relatively quickly kind of building up that presence and the sphere of relationships that they're able to leverage with partners as well as different federal agencies. So the Fed business sits within public sector overall, and that's pretty consistent for the hyperscalers. Google, for instance, just within the last couple of years spun out a public sector standalone business to be more active in pursuing government business. And certainly that paid off as they were included in the JWCC contract. If you look at, for some of their participation prior to that, very, very small handful of engagements. So it really is a big deal for them as much as it is, for a vendor like AWS that had a bigger presence. Google in particular, it really opens a big door for them where they didn't have a big set of relationships in business previously. So in terms of putting some of this in context, thinking about the types of capabilities that stand out and how AWS has done a good job of kind of building not only the relationships but the technology. Certainly things around multi-cloud. You can see from the structure of the contract as well as some of the language and initiatives from those CIOs that are going to be leveraging it, that they are coming in not expecting or really looking for a multi-cloud environment. And we've seen on the commercial side, that's been an evolving trend where for a while it was challenging to be trained and certified and comfortable using, confident using multiple cloud environments. So there was a little bit of a shift towards kind of a mono cloud, single cloud consolidation effort. That's really shifted back to, I think multi-cloud is expected. It gets into some of the management aspects that, again, in the early days of these cloud platforms, they weren't designed to interoperate with other technologies, with other cloud services. It was incumbent either on the customer or some of those third-party management providers to come in and enable that. I think for most customers now, there's the technology, there's the competency to leverage multiple cloud services in a way that is consistent and secure and cost-effective for them. So the government buyers really kind of picking up on that trend, looking for not just one cloud, but selecting amongst the four available for the best option to mix and match. For a vendor like AWS, that's going to be somewhat of a challenge and a liability. They've been less focused on enabling that for customers than the second tier providers like Microsoft and Google have been. For them, it's somewhat out of necessity if they're going to be working within accounts that AWS has a big presence, they need to provide that ability to manage across both their cloud environment as well as the existing AWS assets in order to really grow their presence within some of those accounts. And so there's more capability, more promotion of a multi-cloud environment and making that work for customers than we've seen from AWS. And you can even add Oracle to that as well, a vendor that's not known for flexibility and enabling interoperability across non-Oracle pieces of technology up and down the stack. They're embracing it to some degree as well. So I think that'll be a key part of how successful some of these vendors are bidding for that joint business. So if we look at some of the heat maps we call out for AWS, a lot of subawards coming through General Dynamics. That's far and beyond just the biggest partner for them for the subaward business. With Microsoft, a lot of Accenture federal contracts that have been won. But again, Microsoft has a handful of those subawards. AWS really has quite a few. If you look at more than 200 over the past 3 years, and 45 partners that they're working with through those subawards. So it really is pretty broad ecosystem for them. The streams of revenue, we're estimating about $2 billion. So if you put that in the context of what we'd spoken about earlier, $15 to $20 billion total cloud investment, there's still a pretty diverse field of different services and options. Obviously, there's software as a service offerings as well outside of the hyperscalers. So certainly not a dominant market share for AWS or any other vendor at this point. And then last thing to touch on is, we started to look at, of those kind of prime contract awards that these cloud vendors are participating in, what's the comparison in size in terms of the total size of that prime contract compared with the subaward business, kind of that core cloud technology in terms of what's being provided and procured. And it was $180 for every dollar of AWS contract revenue won, which is well beyond what we've seen in some of the commercial estimates. Part of it is there's a big mix of technology and services, and they can be fairly broad. But again, it just puts in perspective for some of this business that the cloud technology itself can be a very small portion today of the overall award and the overall federal IT spending. So still a lot of, we think that ratio will come down over time as the more cloud technology is actually adopted through some of those prime initiatives, as well as continued growth in terms of the joint go-to-market and the ecosystem efforts across the FSIs, along with the cloud technology providers themselves. So we cover all 3 other vendors as part of that overall report. So you'll see a similar view, and there's more data in terms of agencies and alliances and kind of that joint business and new initiatives that we'll update every year.
Excellent. Thanks, Alan. And so we're going to move to the Q&A now. We typically wrap these webinars up at about the 45-minute mark, but if we have to go a little bit long, we can. We've got a lot of questions in the queue, a number that are specific to specific vendors. So I want to get to those in order, and then we've got one specific question for Alan on one of the charts that he used. but I want to start with one that's a little bit broader, and I think I'll throw this to John Caucis to tackle. And that's the question. Everyone mentions Gen AI, of course, and ChatGPT now. How do these play in the U.S. government cloud market? John, you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. It's really bleeding edge at this point. I think that the federal IT market needs to successfully complete AI 1.0 before they move to AI 2.0. The conversations are happening, and one of the vendors that I track that is really out in front and has established AI as a strategic growth objective, and has actually, they did so. This is Booz Allen Hamilton. Booz Allen Hamilton did so almost 5 years ago now. They were very candid. They were very open. They boldly stated AI is going to be a major growth engine for us for the foreseeable future, and they've done everything you'd expect to make that happen: alliances, joint venture investments, acquisitions, et cetera. Certainly, federal IT decision makers believe that these digital technologies, AI, machine learning, for example, will soon be critical and mission enabling. But the prioritization is still on ensuring that the foundation can accommodate digital technologies. I mentioned earlier that there was a significant volume of investment to modernize network and IT infrastructures up until COVID. That has accelerated now, but there's still a lot of wood to chop there. Still a lot of work that needs to be done to ensure that the technology infrastructure will be able to facilitate digital transformation. So it's coming. It may take a bit longer, and certainly things in the federal space move slower than they do on the commercial side. But the conversations are definitely happening right now, and you're going to hear more buzz around Gen AI. Certainly, I think as we get into the budget negotiations and IT discussions in fiscal 24.
I think it's noteworthy that the EU just passed, the first pass. I mean, it takes steps. So it's the first read and the first vote on some regulations on artificial intelligence, and the market has moved so fast. There's not even any mention in the EU legislation around Gen AI or ChatGPT. So clearly, there's a lot more hype than substance at the moment, and a lot of talk about what this is going to do, but not a lot of certainty. So with that, we'll go to the next question. Alan, I think this one is for you, and I'll pull up the slide as we're talking, if I can. And the question that came in was, looking at this particular slide, is it for the JEDI, DoD, and after Trump, this was awarded to AWS as well? So I think just asking about what exactly this represents, and was JEDI was AWS part of JEDI or not? I'm not really sure. Alan?
Yeah. So for this graph, the big Microsoft is influenced by the JEDI contract in 2020. Obviously, that's not going forward. However, it's still part of the contract data, so there's still, I guess, potential value there, but not expecting that to happen. And then the bell curve up to the right for 2023 is the $9 billion for the JWCC contract that these three vendors, as well as Oracle, which we're going to be adding to the coverage, are going to be, the potential value for them is all the same at $9 billion. But prior to that, the prime awards for these cloud technology vendors is relatively small compared with that. Maybe $100 to $200 million a year, which is insignificant, but compared with $10 billion of potential value, it just skews it. So that's really what it's representing, is just a fundamental shift with that single contract that four vendors are going to be able to compete for.
Excellent, thanks. And for the person who asked the question, if they have any further questions about it, just let us know. There was a question that came in, as a healthcare company, how can this be a help for my company? I will say at TBR, we do have a quarterly healthcare IT services benchmark. It's primarily it's entirely data-driven, really, as everything is, but it mostly looks at the revenue and the headcount and the performance of a collection of IT services vendors, but we cover more broadly. You can actually see them all listed on the left side of the slide right now. And we look at their healthcare practices and what they're doing. So I just encourage the person who asked that question to reach out to me directly, and I can explain what we have in terms of coverage there. Another question that came in, again, this one is specific to a vendor. It's since Mantech is one of the ones here that we've highlighted, do you see Mantech altering its cloud strategy under its new owners, the Carlyle Group? James, I believe this is for you.
Yeah, I can take that. So years before being acquired by Carlyle, Mantech had purchased InfoZen to get greater access to cloud and software vendors. Then in 2021, Mantech deepened its relationships with AWS, Google, and Red Hat before eventually releasing a cloud-agnostic platform called Fernglass. From what we've seen since Mantech was purchased by Carlyle, the company is still taking this vendor-agnostic stance. I don't think it will widely adjust its relationships with the cloud vendors in the near term, but Carlyle will likely want to capitalize on this ramp-up of federal cloud spending. I could see Mantech looking to utilize and invest in building relationships around Microsoft Azure as a part of a push to accelerate its cloud strategy and try to catch up to its federal IT peers. I mean, with Carlyle's financial backing, it's possible they make another InfoZen-like acquisition, but in general, Mantech will want to search for proven partners that can enhance its analytics, automation, cloud, and systems engineering capabilities without diluting its margins. Hopefully that answers your question.
Excellent. And again, if you have any other further questions, you can just reach out on specific vendors, reach out. Another vendor-specific question, John Caucis, I think this is going to go to you, and it's can you talk about GDT, specifically what's changed with how they're partnering, also which agencies they target in this space? John?
Yeah, I'll answer the question about GDT, and I also want to provide a couple of comments to answer the question about healthcare. But let me start with GDT. They recognized, and this is similar to the SAIC situation, but to a larger degree. GDT's GDIT, General Dynamics Information Technology Group, acquired a company called CSRA back in 2018, and it has taken them several years. It was a $7-8 billion acquisition, and it's taken them several years to finalize the integration of that acquisition. But it's done. They're moving forward. And one of the things that they recognized at the end of that very protracted integration period was that they had to start addressing gaps in their Reliance ecosystem. We saw, it was almost overnight that we saw a significant acceleration in overall partnership activity, particularly with the commercial cloud vendors. This was in 2021. This continued through last year. They were enhancing or expanding partnerships with AWS, with Microsoft, with Google. They're also moving into or expanding partnerships in other areas like 5G. That seems to be another strategic growth market for them. But and as one of the two legacy defense primes in our benchmark, they certainly have the depth and the scale, particularly within the DoD. And GDIT is a prime on two key contract vehicles in the DoD, the DEOS program and the MilCloud 2.0 program. But they have been turning their attention towards the civilian sector more actively over the last couple of years as well. So I hope that answers the question about GDT, and I'll use this opportunity to mention that GDT is one of the companies that is tracked in our healthcare IT services benchmark. And what about our discussion today is relevant for healthcare? Well, if you look at our next federal IT benchmark report will be out in a couple of weeks, and healthcare has been a major growth driver. There's been a massive growth tailwind that has come just from the federal health IT sector. Booz Allen Hamilton, for example, Maximus, GDIT has also been doing well in health IT. Accenture Federal. It's been a common thread across the board. It's attracted the attention of up-and-comers like ICF International, have made acquisitions there. Booz Allen Hamilton's acquisition of Liberty IT Solutions. So health IT is a major factor in the overall federal IT growth profile. It is a growth engine for many of the vendors that we track. So we're happy to provide additional detail about how healthcare and federal health IT permeates the operations and the portfolios of the vendors that we track.
Excellent. Thank you, John. So we have a couple questions left, and I'm going to exercise some executive privilege here and combine them because I think they actually are kind of the same question coming from slightly different perspectives. So the first part, I think, will go to Allan, and the question is, which hyperscaler has the most attractive multi-cloud management story and why? And then the second question that I think is sort of looking at it from the other view is, beyond GDT and SAIC, who else do you see among the federal integrators as the leading cloud players in federal IT? So maybe, Allan, if you could go first on the first part of the hyperscalers and multi-cloud management, and then John and James, if you could come in behind that and say, looking at it from the federal IT integrators, how are they? Who's best positioned there? Who are you placing your bets on?
Sure. Yeah. So for the multi-cloud question on the hyperscalers, both Microsoft and Google have a good set of capabilities and kind of story around multi-cloud and management across clouds. I think the thing for me is Microsoft just has a bigger base to really bring that to life for more customers. Google's still very small in terms of their footprint comparatively, and so it's just not as common a use case to have multi-cloud where Google's going to be at the center, kind of managing that for them, as well as Microsoft, their alliance. I mentioned Oracle previously, kind of coming around a bit. The database alliance between Microsoft and Oracle, I think, is another good example of the technology relationships working. Oracle giving a bit, allowing access to some of their database offerings directly from their infrastructure managed through Azure. That type of use case, I think, is going to be more important going forward, and so I think it has a bigger impact on true multi-cloud usage by customers than for some of the smaller cloud platforms.
Okay. I want to take this as John Caucis. I want to take a moment to address the question about other vendors that we track. You can't ignore Leidos. They're the biggest contractor from a revenue standpoint in our benchmark, and they're the biggest contractor in federal IT. They have the scale, they have the track record, they have the record of past performance. They have a book of business that is brimming with strategic awards, multi-billion dollar awards. That is a direct testament to their ability to not only deliver digital transformation at scale, but to do so effectively, and then they can, of course, point back at those engagements to say, this is how well we've done, this is why you need to choose Leidos. They have a very active, proactively managed partnership network. They haven't had to go through the disruption like SAIC and GDIT of a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. They have made acquisitions over the last few years, smaller scale acquisitions to diversify their market focus, and as such, they are, I wouldn't say that cloud is as strategic to Leidos' overall growth profile as it is for SAIC. Leidos is diversifying in other areas, products and platforms, R&D, They're looking overseas, but they can bring the right people to the table. They can craft a solution quickly and effectively. So you can't ignore Leidos as a player in federal cloud. You also can't ignore some of the smaller peers, further down than Leidos. People like Accenture Federal Services, IBM. I think IBM Federal. Both of these companies can look up at at their mothership, so to speak, their global corporate IT leader for solutions. Accenture certainly brings the consulting and advisory cachet to the table. IBM brings the hybrid cloud expertise. They're going after federal cloud from a hybrid cloud standpoint. They've got solid capabilities to layer on top of that in AI and security as well. So those are three vendors that come to mind immediately. And I think we pretty much outlined the leaders. If I've left anyone out, I do apologize, but just top of mind there. But once again, I would direct anyone interested to our individual reports as well as the benchmark, and you can see how the players that we track, how they're evolving their individual cloud businesses.
James, anything else to add on that before we wrap?
I think John covered that perfectly. And anything else, I would just be retreading his points.
All right, excellent, thanks. So a few minutes left, and appreciate everybody putting in the questions that we got here today. And as you can tell, there's a lot that's covered in this report. Again, we're looking at those 4 cloud vendors, and we're looking at 5 of the federal-focused IT services vendors that we cover in the much larger federal IT services space that John and James work on. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. That report itself is coming out in the middle of next week, and then we will be updating it 6 months from now. And of course, everything that we've talked about is built on the foundation of the vendor reports that we put out every quarter as these companies that we're following release their financials, and we take a look at their strategy, and we took a look at their business model, and we try and benchmark, and we do benchmark them against each other and what's happening in the market. So